Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the We Are Change talk show. I thank you very much for joining me. It's been a turbulent week with the YouTube purge commencing. All the videos from We Are Change have been backed up on BitChute, Vimeo, TopBuzz, and archive.org. Links will be in the description just in case the worst case scenario happens. You'll be able to find the content there. But we have a very special guest for you today. Caroline Stevens is here to discuss the current situation over in the UK, Brexit, high levels of unemployment, poverty, and the corruption that plagues the place that she lives. So we'll cut to that interview now. Hi Caroline, thank you very much for appearing on the We Are Change talk show. How are you going today?
Just removing the ice from the windscreen this morning, which is, I guess, something that you don't have to do much in Melbourne.
Well, they say global warming is a real threat, but it's still very cold here. People have still got their heaters on. So.
And about the rain over here, we're just days and days now of rain. And what's that about?
That's a good question. So please explain to the viewers how you came into the public eye and what you've achieved so far with your campaign.
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity. What happened was in 2013, I went to a public meeting, and the public meeting was about our membership of the European Union. Now, it's something that I must admit I hadn't even considered what we were actually doing there in the first place, and what our politicians who we sent to Brussels were doing there either. So we learned that we were spending lots and lots of money each day, and we didn't seem to be getting anything back for it. And what we did get back, we were being told how to spend it. Well, originally I'm from Yorkshire in the north of England. I guess some of your listeners and viewers will know where Yorkshire is. It's God's own country, they say. And we don't take too kindly to people being told how to spend their money. And I certainly don't like to be told how to spend my money. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. And I felt really indignant because at that time I was going into schools for a charity and teaching children and, believe it or not, the teachers how to save and not go into debt. So it didn't seem to sort of make a lot of sense that we were saving in the schools, and I knew that house prices were getting out of control, and there was, to stand in front of those children and give them, they needed to aspire to being able to buy their own house, but I couldn't see that happening. And yet, the government was spending all this money in the EU. And we have open door immigration to 27 other countries. So it just seemed quite bizarre when you consider how small we are as an island compared to some of the other countries. And I just did not see the point in being within the EU. So that started me on a little crusade I stood for the local council, because they were looking for volunteers for the council elections. But I took 25% of the vote in a little council area that I actually didn't even live in. But I just got I was being given lots of information about what the EU was all about. And I thought, this is no good, just working in a council anyway, discussing pavements and bus stops and planning permission. I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to get to the root of what I saw as our problems at that time, which was the EU. So I stood for Parliament in 2015. And that was a very sharp learning curve. Again, I stood for Parliament in an area that I didn't live in, which I guess my family were quite relieved at, because it's quite painful if you're coming into politics on the impact of your family. If your children are at school and, you're standing for a political party that is the outside runner, if you like, but I stood for the United Kingdom Independence Party. It seemed to me to be the only party that really meant that we wanted to leave the European Union. And it just meant, they had a good orator, the leader, Nigel Farage, so I thought. And after the general election, we were then offered the referendum by David Cameron. So he basically, I got the plum job, if you like, because I was really into networking and public speaking and training. I was given the job as campaign manager for one of the two Leave groups, which is called Leave EU. So for 11 months, I traveled around the country, training up the activists, how to tackle street stalls, how to conduct themselves, gave them lots more information about things like the European arrest warrant so they could engage the public. And I debated with existing MPs and to hear the lies. And I'm thinking, am I in, it spurred me on in a way that these people are telling so many lies. And of course, sometimes these debates were held in schools as well. So the teachers were also sometimes involved with the cover-up with the EU. They would organise for pro-EU speakers the week before from local universities, and to sort of get the children thinking that they should be in the EU. And then, of course, I was then debating perhaps one-on-one, one pro-Remain and me being the leaver. And so, it really did teach me an awful lot. But we won. We did actually win. But of course, that's not the end of the matter, because that's been almost 3.5 years now. We're heading for a general election tomorrow. And that's the third election in 4 years. So we're supposed to have a general election every 5 years. And so they're kicking the can further and further into the long grass. And there is no real sign of, leaving the European Union. In fact, we're still part of the European Court of Justice, and they're going to be deciding on our pension schemes on the 19th of December. So, maybe it's going to be a case of when people realize that our membership is going to involve equalization of pensions. It's going to, we don't even have to be a member of the EU for the government to show how corrupt they are. They signed something called the Marrakesh Declaration last December with various other African countries and EU countries. And we're now going to be faced with a migratory flow of women and children from North, West and East Africa. And our migration, we have a lot of people who are homeless. I've fed the homeless for the past 4 months on behalf of a church. And all the indigenous people that are in the homeless shelters. And it's all right, people saying, oh, well, they deserve it, they haven't kept up with their bills, etc. But, the cost of accommodation these days in the UK is quite astronomical. And once you fall off, it's like being a hamster on a wheel, isn't it? Once you, for whatever reason, whether it's marital breakup or addiction, or just simply just a sequence of events. For example, a friend of mine has had a serious illness, which meant he's basically had to live on his earnings for 10 years, and he's only in his late 40s. He's had a debilitating illness, but it's so difficult to actually get benefits in the UK for people who are originally from the UK, that you've got this divisive atmosphere, because you're seeing, the truth that the government still want open door immigration. Exactly. So it's all everything's to play for. I think we've got running out of time, and our government wants to expand the university system, so get more and more people into debt, to bring more and more people into the country. And then there's no jobs for them at the end of the day, or certainly not a job that they're qualified to do. So there's nothing worse than people aspiring to something that they can never, ever achieve.
It's impressive what you've accomplished and trying to liberate the British people, because it's virtually a dictatorship when your financial well-being is controlled and the goals of becoming a homeowner is just unattainable. And It's horrendous what people are experiencing. The level of poverty is at an all-time high, and we need this corruption exposed and dealt with, don't we, Caroline?
We do, and so I set up I basically met a guy who had worked for the TV companies. Met him at a conference 18 months ago, and he was looking for a new presenter. So I presented a lot of his shows. And then I decided in the middle of this year to set up my own YouTube channel, because the thing is, you've got total control of your own, the people who you interview. You're not being told, I want you to interview this person, that person, because when you're in the truth movement, your credibility can take a huge nosedive just for getting the wrong one or two guests on your show. So you do need, a lot of my interviews I did previously, I've never transferred them across, just simply because I have question marks over them. It's like Satan doesn't reproduce a $19 bill. He reproduces a $20 bill. So it's fine for everybody else to follow, to get information from people. But I'm trying to home in now on exactly what we've got to do, what really is going on. I've been listening to a lady this morning about child trafficking. And of course, this is a subject which I guess is at one of the root problems, one of the root cover-ups really with the elites. And so it's all embedded in the banksters. I mean, I've done quite a lot of shows about the Epstein case, which I think was a case you wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. The Queen and the royal family, they're nothing more than an evil gang who are said to be responsible for the death of Princess Diana, satanic ritual abuse, pedophilia, and the list goes on.
It's true. And it's funny, I'll give you an example on how people's perceptions have changed slightly. About 8 months ago, I put on my timeline a picture of that little naked boy, about 8 years of age, hanging outside on a rope. Outside Buckingham Palace from, yes. I don't know, first floor. Or no, it's higher than the first floor. And people were absolutely horrified that I could share that. And they said, oh, it must be photoshopped. Well, having worked in, the promotion side of leaving the European Union, I said, well, I really don't think you can Photoshop that sort of picture. You can Photoshop pictures, but not moving videos, not that I was aware of. And they wouldn't have it. But anyway, and you lose friends, and I just say friends loosely because I lose, I've got 5,000 friends on my Facebook, and I lose a couple every day, and then that gives the opportunity for a couple more people to come and see things. But there again, I'm banned on Facebook now, shadow banned. So, it's the real truth seekers that have actually been removed from social media. So I'm shadow banned. In fact, I've got a public profile on Facebook. And it was saying to me the other day, a message popped up, you haven't posted on your public profile for quite a while. I'm thinking, but I can't post because you've told me I'm not allowed to post. So, of course, when you're in the public eye, I've got people coming along and thinking, why hasn't Caroline done anything on her public profile for the last 4 weeks or 8 weeks? And I'm banned now till March 2020.
Really?
Yeah.
True. I'm shadow banned as well and receiving the same messages, but only till early January, March. That's very harsh, isn't it? Where you deserve to be rewarded for telling the truth, not punished.
I mean, the thing is, who runs Facebook? We're talking about all the same families, the families that are controlling the world, the families that we know about anyway, and that goes back to the royal family and the problems with Prince Andrew.
Yes.
And it's interesting because obviously it has hit the headlines. I mean, it was in the headlines certainly in America in 2015, and everything gets hushed up. And of course now with the Epstein case, you've got Prince Andrew. The Epstein case was obviously a blackmail situation to blackmail all the leaders of the world. and it seems that all of them are having dalliances with underage children.
Absolutely. The story with Prince Andrew doesn't add up, stating that he spent time with Epstein purely to sever ties with a convicted sex offender. The interview that he gave was very incriminating, and proper investigations should be made. The fact that he's not behind bars is very alarming, and there should be justice for the victims, shouldn't there, Caroline?
Be justice for the victims, and I was pressing for Andrew to return to the US before he did the car crash interview. And even then, when I was putting posts that Andrew go to the US, face the music, people were saying, oh, well, the girl was 17. I mean, this was women trying to justify. And I knew that there was a lot more going on Epstein's Island than parties with 17-year-old girls. But it's a much bigger story, and this is what we need to expose, is the links between the paedophilia, the child trafficking, the sacrifices with the banking industry, because we've got the bank, our number one of the top banks in the UK is Barclays Bank. And the chief executive of Barclays Bank is a chap called James Staley, or Jess Staley, as he's affectionately called. Well, he visited Epstein. I'm trying to be careful what I say, because obviously we don't want to get sued. But he has visited Epstein, and then there's, of course, these denials of one side saying they don't really know, the other one is not a friend. But why would you visit a convicted paedophile? And then it links in with the British government, because James Staley is the chief executive of a high street bank, and that's in the public interest, that the government is actually supposed to authorize all these positions at the top of the banking system. So what's going on there? And we uncovered certain MPs saying one thing, and yet parliamentary records saying another. There was no grilling, etc., etc. So the whole thing, I mean, I've interviewed a lady who you're going to interview, I believe, about corruption, but that's just one part of the corruption. We're talking about at the top of high street banks. What's the link between Epstein? We've also got banks linked with the Clinton Foundation. We know what happens with the monies from the Clinton Foundation that gets shipped off to Africa, and then children are sent to America without their parents, and they're classed as orphans, and so on and so on. I mean, there's so much that President Trump has really got to sort out, and obviously he's got problems of his own as well at the moment. So it's I just think it's a case of why is it that the British press at this point are pressing the matter about Prince Andrew? I'm just also very suspicious of the timing. Is it a case of the press saying, in the same way as they're pressing for the abolition of the House of Lords, which might come as a shock to some of your listeners, because they've filled the House of Lords with lifetime peers, cronies of the political establishment. There used to be hereditary peers, but most of those were taken out in 1999, a very significant year, because it was just the year before, just coming up to the millennium.
Yep.
So we've had a real change in the format and the makeup of the House of Lords. They're not for the people. They're for the globalists in the main. And then, they're busy with their fingers in the pies of building immigrants' accommodation and so on. So we've got a rejig in Parliament, the pressing for removal of the House of Lords. And we've now also got, which is happening now, and we've also got, well, are people just going to call for the abolition of the monarchy?
Yes.
Is that what the New World Order actually wants? Because it doesn't need to pretend anymore that there is a lady with a crown, in central London who is, bringing in money for the British purse. That's all a myth anyway.
That's exactly right. And what we're used to seeing the mainstream media focusing on royal engagements such as weddings and births, but they never delve into some of the atrocities that are being committed by the royal family. That's all covered up, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it came as a shock to some of my regular email recipients the other day. I said, well, the Queen has allegedly an international arrest warrant out on her life and has had so since 2015. And they were truly shocked. And I said, this is the truth. You know, no person, and people seem to, in my eyes anyway, and I believe in a creator, and I do believe, I don't believe in, public construct of religion, but I believe that nobody is above the law, even the Queen, and she should face the music for, she has been found guilty in a common law court in Belgium for the abduction of 10 children in Canada, which I know there's a guy over in Canada who's been campaigning about that for years and years.
Yes, that's very shocking what was exposed there. A number of children going missing on the day Queen Elizabeth visited a school. And this should be common knowledge, the level of evil that's lurking at Buckingham Palace. Everybody should know this, shouldn't they, Caroline?
They should. I was just saying to a friend today, and she doesn't go into this conspiracy theory, because I mean that's what they call it, isn't it? Call people like you and myself who are talking about this conspiracy theorists because we're going against the mainstream media. But things have changed with the royal family, with the Prince Andrew debacle. But my friend was saying that, have you not noticed that when Prince Philip goes into hospital every so often, he looks 10 years younger when he comes out? You do have to wonder what they do to his blood, don't you, when he goes into hospital?
It's believed they're on radical life extension systems where they get routine blood transfusions from a lot of young people and other forms of life extension programs that they're privileged to. And it seems those that are knighted by the Queen, they seem to be criminals and serial rapists. That's who gets knighted and gets the honourable title as Sir. It seems like...
I think the MBE, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I was just thinking of one person in particular. I think the MBE actually just means member of the British establishment. You have generally, maybe not all cases, you'll probably get a few people coming on and say, oh, this athlete or that athlete, but most people will have done some brown nosing, shall we say.
Yes, it certainly seems that way. And some of the lies that are being told by this Prince Andrew, that he doesn't sweat and he doesn't go to parties, when there's so much information that directly conflicts with the statements that he made. They couldn't tell the truth if their life depended on it, could they?
Are you familiar with the Committee of 300?
I certainly am.
So you've got people like Andrew, Charles, Princess Anne, the Queen, and Prince Philip, together with 295 other influential movers and shakers, including ex-prime ministers like David Cameron and Tony Blair. So you see, you've got David Cameron and Tony Blair. One was for the Labour side, one was for the Conservative side, but it just shows you they're actually all part of the same cabal. But they just play this political game, which, leads us back into what's going to happen tomorrow. There's people tearing each other apart on Facebook about how can you trust Corbyn? How can you trust Boris Johnson? I mean, somebody sent me an article about Corbyn and his friendships with IRA members. And I just said, well, how do you trust Boris Johnson? And then I listed another 10 things. Oh, she just couldn't handle it, because it's this mindset of, we'll get Brexit if we vote Tory. Well, no, the deal hasn't really radically changed from the deal that we were being presented with at the beginning of the year. And of course, people won't talk about something called the Lisbon Treaty, which is something that I tackled, albeit 10 years after it had gone into been put into place, but nobody was talking about the Lisbon Treaty. And this is a treaty which we signed in 2007, went through into action on the 1st of December 2009, and it basically turns us all into a super state. So we'll end up with the same taxation system, the same pensions, and more, poorer and poorer countries are joining the EU, or they will do.
Yes, that's right. And, you've got British taxpayers, they're paying their salaries when behind closed doors they're committing these heinous crimes. And they're free from prosecution, and all leaders of Commonwealth state, they swear allegiance to the Queen, not to the people that elected them. So that right there is unethical, isn't it?
Yes, well, in the House of Parliament, I don't know if it's the same in your Parliament, but they have a whip system. So they have a whip in the House of Lords with the peers and the barons, and they have a whip in the House of Commons, the elected representatives. So this whip has a filing cabinet with all your dirty secrets, because let's be honest, nobody is Mother Teresa. So everybody's got something. They might have been to a party, or they've had somebody plonked on their knee and a photograph taken, etc. So they've got this whip system. Yeah. So whichever party you're going to vote for, it's going to the Privy Council are actually the council that are in charge, not the Muppets or the puppets we see every day on our TV. The Privy Council, including the Queen. And who else is on the Privy Council? We've got some MPs on there, and we've also got the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is I've done a couple of shows about monologues about the Archbishop of Canterbury. Who is he? Because he's supposed to be, he and the Queen sort of preside, as I see it, over the Church of England, which includes the Church of Australia. And that's why it's so significant of, the significance. You are a very significant other part to the UK. You're one of our colonies.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting information, the Privy Council. I've discussed that with Wayne Glue. I implore the viewers to do some research on that. See, the royal family simply don't obey the laws of the land like they expect everyone else to. And, this really has to change, and they're exempt from...
You think about Prince Charles having stern words with Prince Andrew, but, pots and kettles, they all have secrets. What happened to Diana? Who knew in the royal family,
Yeah, exactly. And what does it say about the royal family when you have Prince Charles associating with Jimmy Savile very closely, Prince Andrew linked in with Epstein, and that seems to be the company they keep. And you can tell a lot about somebody's character by who they choose to associate with, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want Epstein and Jimmy Savile on your friends list. And also, didn't Prince Charles actually verify for somebody, was it an archbishop or a bishop who'd been involved in paedophilia as well? What sort of friends? You can have all the friends in the world and you choose paedophiles for your friends.
Very alarming, and that's a definite red flag for anyone that wants to put the royal family on a pedestal. You got a victim claimed that she was paid $400 to have sex with Prince Andrew. I mean, this is not honourable behaviour that you would expect from a royal family. None whatsoever.
I think it's also questionable why people like his ex-wife, and Ghislaine Maxwell, are actually wanting to stand up for him and support him, given his alleged misdemeanors, of which they know the truth. And they, why would you ever stand up? Let him fight his own battles, but what's Fergie's part in all of this?
That's a very good question. It seems like it's a massive child trafficking ring that they're fully immersed in. It certainly appears that way, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It certainly has to, we have questions to ask and we would like them answered.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the Council of 13 bloodlines, they're all inbred through their lineage. That's very unusual, isn't it?
Well, yes, for sure.
And, what's been brought forward to the public isn't sufficient. We need proper investigations done into the activities that are occurring at Buckingham Palace. The people have a right to know, but the Queen is immune to the Freedom of Information Act. When people try and ask these questions and gather that info, they're denied, aren't they?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about the Freedom of Information Act, because that was introduced by one of the Committee of 300, being Tony Blair. And he said it at the time, it was the worst thing he'd ever introduced. And I've interviewed a chap he's actually now named as the vexatious King of England and Scotland for the numbers of Freedom of Information requests that he's put through. And quite often they will put, as a response to your request, they'll class it as vexatious and get out of it that way. Or they'll say the information is not in the public interest. I mean, when I was doing the monologue about the Archbishop of Canterbury, I actually wrote to Lambeth Palace and said, look, if the Archbishop, we want transparency here. You've got all these people in the Church of England putting money into the coffers each week, the collecting tin, and how much does the Archbishop of Canterbury actually earn? Strangely, I've had no response. I sent them a reminder, but still no response. But there are no details of what he earns on the website. And it seems to me that, having done further investigations, he defers to the Pope, doesn't he? So everybody, all these religious leaders have defer to the Pope, in which case this is your New World Order religion.
Exactly. That seems to be what's happening 100%. And, the heinous crimes, and then they're all linked in with secret societies. Like you said, Committee of 300, they regularly attend the Bilderberg year in, year out. They're there, pushing these policies, these tyrannical agendas. They're all compromised through these societies that they frequent, aren't they? You see the Freemason handshake, all of it.
I was going to say, I assume you're not a Freemason.
Not at all, no.
And the number of arguments I've had with people on my own friends list with what's wrong with Freemasonry. And I said, but you were actually giving an oath, and that oath is to the dark side. Whether you understand, whether you realize that is the truth. And they haven't got it because they don't see what happens on the 33rd degree or above, but they are under a dark oath. They have stuff that's in the dark, haven't it? Everything's hidden. Why would a normal chap join a secret society with a trouser leg up, wearing an apron, wearing lots of regalia, and saying that he's some sort of brotherhood mentality? I mean, this is the sort of thing you might have done when you were about 10 and you were off into the woods together, and like little Boy Scouts, which is another society, actually, because you're giving an oath again, actually, to the dark side, and nobody knows this.
100%. That's my impression as well. These secret clubs taking oaths, it's very dishonest to be hiding certain matters from people. It's very sneaky behavior and very deceptive when you're behind closed doors pledging allegiance to leaders of a brethren.
Yeah.
It's not what you'd expect from leaders in the community and in politics. You don't want that. You want honesty, integrity, people that have that in spades. But it's in direct conflict when they join these secret societies.
I mean, when I went over to Australia, I went to various town halls and rooms attached to the churches, and I looked at the pictures of the people, the prominent people, and you just know there were free men. they were all Freemasons, and even Australia's been carved up. The you know you In fact, things are not so hidden in Australia. You've got beautiful house in Perth, and you can see it's got Freemason architecture, and it's the biggest house, the brightest house on the top of a hill, looking down on everybody else. You've got buildings in the centre of your town, in Perth, with the Freemasonry. What do you call it? The symbol.
The compass and set square.
That's right. And on the side of the building, in a very prominent position, you can't miss that symbology. And people just don't understand the importance of symbology. The general election tomorrow is being held on the 12th of the 12th, 2019. So that actually, in numerology, it's 12, 12, 12. You add the 2019, which is 3, 3, 3. And apparently there's going to be a full moon on something like the 12 minutes past 12. So you couldn't make it up. Everything has a significance.
Absolutely. It's all occult numerology, and they follow that to a T. The dates, times, and the moon, that's when they perform a lot of these satanic rituals. So I feel sorry for a lot of the children on the night of that election, Caroline.
Yeah, I do as well.
Yeah, it's very alarming, and it's very cold-blooded. That's where there's been a lot of accusations, it must be reptilian, because a normal person with a heart, compassion, and kindness, they wouldn't be engaging in satanic rituals. So,
well, of course, this is something you must have heard of David Icke.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course, David Icke, he got cast off into the wilderness, 10 years plus ago now, and he had raised the subject of reptilians.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I ever particularly open up about, although I have allegedly interviewed one about a year ago. And so, I always turned around to the audience and say, do your own research. I couldn't possibly, even if you're not talking about reptilian subjects, you cannot possibly verify a person's whole story. They may have something hidden, and that's not your fault. You're just giving, like you're giving me a platform today. I've given a platform to a variety of people. But yes, I did interview. She's this lady, very attractive lady. She talked about being raped 6 times in underground military bases in the UK, and she classes herself as a reptilian. She's down on Earth to conduct a mission, finish a mission. I don't know what that mission is, and she just seemed like an ordinary person, just like you or me. So who knows what walks around around us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, and it makes perfect sense. They're said to draw in a lot of the dark energy from the children that are kept in immense amounts of fear. And when you look at the Monarch programming, the MK Ultra victims, it's all rampant right throughout the royal family, isn't it? This type of programming.
Yeah, and there was Operation Paperclip, wasn't there, over in the US? But yes, the Monarch programming, that's for people who don't know much about it. I mean, it's neuro-linguistic programming. I mean, we've got neuro-linguistic programming from the box in the corner of our living room. So it's quite amazing. Once you open yourself up to taking the red pill, if you like, you can't really go back to watching all those inane TV shows, but it gives you now. I look at TV in a totally different way, and I'm always very judgmental on the way that phrases are spoken, insofar as they have an obvious agenda in the news in particular, and it's the way that they just come out with, well, global warming is this, and it's like, no, but there's no debate. This is what is happening. It's the LGBT agenda. This is what's happening. Every child should, at the age of 5, courtesy of Stonewall, obviously run by Stonewall, was historically set up by the gay community, but certain prominent gay people. And, you know, they want to force that agenda onto our primary school children from the age of 5. Now, I don't know if you probably can remember being 5 more than myself, but the last thing I ever wanted to be talking about or listening to was hearing about the LGBT agenda. I think it's quite enough. When you're, you know, getting mature, you're going through puberty, etc. But you don't want it being forced on you at 5. It opens too many. You know, we've got a situation now in the UK where 1 in 4 people suffer from mental health issues, and you're just overloading. The media's overloading the kids of today, and I just shudder. I just fear for the next generation. I don't know how they're turning out as normal as they do.
That's right. It's very upsetting, and the level of depravity is at an all-time high. What they're pushing on the children, I feel very sorry for the parents. You know, the children, they're not even old enough to know their ABCs, and, you know, what they're being taught, it's immoral, it's very disturbing. And now you have children transitioning genders, and their brain isn't fully developed. This is atrocious, and it needs to be put a stop to immediately. I don't even know how that got passed and how that agenda got put through without more.
Oh, I can explain. Well, basically, David Cameron was the Prime Minister, so he's Ashkenazi, and he was leading the UK at the time. He was in number 10 Downing Street, and he pushed it through Parliament with the help of Theresa May, another Ashkenazi, I believe. And they'd been to Brussels, had a meeting about it. It was an agenda that the EU wanted to push forward to all the EU member countries. I mean, they've just pushed it through in Malta 2 years ago, which is a deeply devout Catholic country. And they also, David Cameron, prior to that vote, had ensured that Archbishop Welby, who'd been in the finance industry and the oil industry, who suddenly had this vision that he must go and become, go into the religious industry, because it is an industry. He suddenly got catapulted to becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury in a very, very short space of time. And then, so with David Cameron's blessing, if you like. So who is Archbishop Welby? Is he a Jesuit? We don't know. I've asked Lambeth Palace for the answers to these questions. Why is he heading up the Church of England? Surely we should have Protestants in Buckingham Palace. Surely we should have Protestants in our Houses of Parliament. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And there lies the crux of many of our problems today.
Yeah, well said. It's a very satanic agenda that they're pushing. And, you know, people should be outraged about this. There should be petitions circulated to put an end to this Safe Schools program and this pedophilic system that they have in place that's being thrust upon the children against their will. It's absolutely horrendous, isn't it? And we need to put a stop to this.
Yeah. Well, you know, what happens in the UK has a direct impact on Australia as well. We've, as I say, we signed this Marrakesh Declaration last December, allowing all these Africans to move into the UK. And immigration in the UK is set to rise substantially. There's a few reports out now about that. And, you know, even Priti Patel, that they'll say on the one hand that we're going to control immigration, but, you know, Priti Patel has opened the doors up allegedly to, well, going to relax the rules for 250,000 Hong Kong residents to come and live in the country. So, you know, imagine 250,000 people just descending, which they could easily do. That's the size of a northern city. And we don't have great employment prospects here at all.
Yeah. See, the high levels of unemployment, the rates of poverty and homelessness, all this could be rectified instantly with the Queen's enormous wealth that's been accumulated, and by the royal family and, of course, the British taxpayers. All these problems could be pretty much a thing of the past, as well as the poverty being experienced in third world countries as well. That's a clear indication that the royal family isn't for the people. It's very much self-serving.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I was over in Perth, I met a chap, and he was just saying how Britain is actually the holders. The British people are the indigenous British people are the holders of God's covenant, and as such, our monarch is not supposed to benefit from in the way that she has done from her position. So, if that's the case, she's broken God's covenant. So what situation that puts us in? I mean, somebody said to me from Australia yesterday that, well, surely you've still got a queen. I said, well, it's debatable actually, because I've heard so many reports that the queen has stepped down from this role, that role in 1999. And so how would we know whether the queen was still a queen or not a queen? I mean, she was a fake queen anyway. She's not. There are other people that are more entitled to sit on the throne, and just the fact that she conducted a coronation. There were 2 coronations. Mm-hmm. We don't know what happened in the second coronation, but the oath wasn't quite right. It was done on a fake stone, and so where do we stand? That's what I'm trying to get people together to discuss. And how do we solve this problem? Because I just see you've got a situation where your government is so openly corrupt with your farmers. Yeah. I mean, do you want to sort of mention about that, because you'll be more familiar? The drought situation. You're not seemingly getting the rain where you need it, or the regulations on your cattle and so on.
That's exactly what's happening. It's devastating what the farmers are experiencing. The level of drought, which a lot of people have said looks like it's man-made. It's definitely human manipulation that's caused this drought. They have all the capabilities of cloud seeding to end this, give rain back for the animals to prosper. The level of suicide within the farmers is enormous. They cannot deal with this. They're watching their livelihood being destroyed. We have coal seam fracking as well. Some of the landowners can set fire to the water. It's a horrendous problem that we're experiencing here. People are really battling through some of the worst type of situations, and it seems through geoengineering is the main root cause of the problem. So I mean,
and then you've got the reduction in numbers. You had 400,000 farmers 30 years ago, as I understand, and now you've got barely 40,000 farms today, and you've got China buying up huge swathes of the land.
Absolutely. The big Chicoms are buying up all the land as well as the assets as well. So everything's being sold out from underneath the Australian public, and every day we're losing more and more of our rights and liberties. That's why we need more people speaking out about this and facing these tyrants and the system that we're under. This regime, it's really deplorable, the dictatorship that's being forced among the people. It's really outrageous. And with the censorship, it makes it harder to get the word out there about this problem.
Well, exactly. Gosh, we're so similar, the Australians and the British. As I say, we're brothers and sisters. The indigenous British people, they don't like to complain that much. They don't want to they don't like complaining in restaurants, for example, that much. I mean, I'm an exception to the rule, and maybe Yorkshire people are the exceptions to the rule. But there are a lot of people who, I live now in the south of the country, and the people down here, they're quite different and not so direct as Yorkshire people. And, I mean, you had William Wilberforce. He came from Yorkshire. He liberated the slaves. And to me, we are enslaved, not just within the EU, but we're enslaved with the New World Order, and our government is, we had Liam Fox. He used to be a trade minister, and he was classed as being for leaving the European Union. And he wrote an article in the Times last weekend, and basically he's also a disgraced minister, as many of the ministers are. They become disgraced for indiscretions of something or other, but then they go out into the wilderness. They're still getting paid. They'll go out into the wilderness for a couple of years, and then they'll come back in again. It's like if you were doing that, if you were conducting activities in the way that working for an organization, and you did what they did, you would have been sacked. You'd have gone through disciplinary, you'd have gone through your 4 rounds of disciplinary, and then they would have said, look, we'll just buy you off, just give you a few thousand, go now, clear everything up, put it in a cardboard box, and you'd be out the door. But that doesn't happen, you see, with the parliaments. It doesn't happen with these global elites. They're all in it together.
Exactly. It's a modern form of slavery that people are almost signing up for. It was said, Edward Bernays, speaking on propaganda, to have the royal family associating with celebrities, it makes it all seem more acceptable. And when you see some of the programs that they put on television, the royals, Kate and Wills, people watch this on their television sets, and they just feel like the royals are a part of the family, when these are the exact family that's working against them.
Well, I interviewed Greg Hallett, who purports to be one of the people, and I say purport, and I always, because I don't know 100%, he says he's in the line for kingship, along with people like Ivan Talbot, who I've interviewed. So I'm not sort of trying to discredit people in any shape or form. I don't know who is the one that's most entitled, but Greg Hallett said to me, he said, you realise that Queen Elizabeth II is the illegitimate daughter of Winston Churchill. So if you think of it that way, so she's a Rothschild, he's a Rothschild, they're all part of the same. This is what's the problem, the banksters, the globalists. You've got Serco, which is the big New World organization that up until a couple of years ago, nobody had really ever heard of, until I did a show on it, on Serco. But then, of course, when I was in Australia, I learned that William and Harry actually run Serco, because I knew that in the UK, the Winston Churchill's great grandson, one of the Soameses, actually is a chief executive in the UK. So this is where they're all in it together. I mean, at the weekend, there was a picture of William with his wife, with Hillary Clinton, and he's taking advice now about climate change from Hillary Clinton and Bill Gates. So Hillary Clinton's married to Bill Clinton, as we know, ex-president. He's on the Committee of 300, and Bill Gates is on the Committee of 300. So you've got William, who's also on the Committee of 300. They've got this all sewn up, or so they think.
Very interesting. You should mention that company, Serco. They own a lot of private prisons. So You see Prince William and Harry, they're really funding and pushing this prison industrial complex, another form of slavery, isn't it, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. They've got, they own, now let me think, what do they do? Air traffic control, the prisons, asylum seeking accommodation. They've been given money from the British government to build accommodation for people coming into the country. Isn't this scandalous? And there's me feeding the indigenous population. We've got 1 in 5 children growing up in poverty in the UK, and we think we're a generous nation. We should use the taxpayers' money to give it to our friends, our elitist friends, to propagate this myth. They're in charge of the whole media. All the 6 groups, including Reuters, all can be traced back to this Rothschild umbrella.
Absolutely. It's the tyrannical system, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, it all goes into that 13 bloodlines, pulling the strings, of mankind. They control media, the banking sectors. They run everything with an iron fist. So, hopefully the veil will start to lift. What would you say the impression of the royal family is on the British public? I'm sure a lot of people are disgusted about some of the heinous crimes that have been brought to light recently.
Well, I think the British public think that Prince Andrew is the black sheep. They're not really thinking about the rest of the royal family. In the main, if you go out into the streets, obviously people who follow me, they will know how I feel and what I've uncovered. But yes, it's going to take a lot for us to defeat the mainstream media. So I don't know what's going to happen next. Who knows? But this global climate change, we know that they could finish us off tomorrow if they really wanted to. So we've got and I mean that in more ways than one, because the general election of tomorrow, we're going to have more of the same, I guess. There could be a hung parliament, but what difference would that make? Because the political parties are actually run by the same elitist cabal. And the number of times I've said that in my videos, and people say, yeah, I get it, Caroline. And then say, Caroline, who are you going to vote for? I said, well, nobody. Why would you want to give your consent? The powers that be need you to authorize. So they need your consent because they know who's voting. They know your card numbers. They know. So there we go. Don't vote. There's no point you wasting energy. We should be doing something far more constructive.
Absolutely. And the way the system's structured, a lot of these people, they're nominated into power back at their Freemason lodges and these secret sects that they belong to. That's where a lot of the legislation gets decided upon and people are elected. And it's just the illusion that the people have some sort of power in who's elected. But that's very far from reality nowadays, isn't it, when they're all linked in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was talking to a guy and he said he'd been in the EU buildings a few years ago, and he was introduced to a guy called Henry Bolton.
Yeah.
And he said he was introduced to Henry Bolton as a future leader of UKIP. And Henry Bolton became a future leader of UKIP, albeit for a short space of time, because Henry Bolton actually worked in the EU at some point. So it's like people got to realise that these occupiers, if you like, they've been occupying the important places for over 300 years. And, it's a lot of this is to do with usury, the banking environment, it's fraud, and people just don't get it yet.
Yeah, that's right. There needs to be an uprising. People need to march the streets and demand this tyrannical order be removed and freedom and liberties being given back to the people. It seems like there's a tremendous battle that we have ahead of us, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, France seems to have taken the bit between its teeth. They have been rioting for best part of a year now, and it seems that the French people actually wrote what they wanted from their government. They set it out. But the people in our country, a lot of the people at the top have been, how can I put it? The controlled opposition. So they are surrounded by the establishment. And I guess some of those people have been paid. And there is no coordination. And, it's all about egos. And there's even rumours that some of the people who are in the Yellow Vest movement never even voted to leave the European Union at all. So you've got this mix of, you've got nobody. You've got all these different groups like the veterans. You've got people who've had their children removed from them. But then one group will say, oh, I don't want this group turning up at this event. I don't want them speaking at this event. And, the French just seem to, as far as I can see, they just seem to mug along together and get things done. And we just do not, nobody has taken the bit between the teeth and said, well, actually, we have got a constitution, whether you like it or not. It doesn't have to be all written down in one place like the Australians have got it. And you've got a constitution which says that the people are supposed to be consulted for a referendum, you know, in the form of a referendum. And you should have been consulted when we took you in to the EEC on the 1st of January 1973, because you weren't asked about that, and neither were we.
That's exactly right. We need the royal family removed from power. We need proper freedom and liberty restored to the people, and separation from government, especially when they're criminals. And it's linked to Lord Mountbatten, you know, getting Jimmy Savile on side to procure children. The amount of crime is extreme, and they shouldn't be free from prosecution and allowed to commit these heinous acts against children. They can't get away with it for much longer if we keep exposing it.
Well, let's hope this gets aired. I do hope that this film gets aired and you don't get taken down.
Well, we've jumped through a lot of hoops to still be here and having routine programs. There's a YouTube purge that's being pushed on a lot of truth seekers and truth tellers. They're going to make it harder to get the information out to the people, information that people so rightfully deserve to know. It's a complete brainwashing system that we have in power at the moment with the mainstream media and the lies that are being spread. But hopefully people can dissect some of the information and do some proper research themselves, and then it'll start to expose some of the crimes that have been committed, won't it? Historical allegations.
I was going to say that people at home, don't take our word for it. Please do your research, but do research thoroughly. And because obviously there's information that's being removed on a daily basis on the internet as well.
Absolutely. People are being demonetized, terminated from platforms.
Yeah.
And you see what they're pushing on the trending page. It's all very perverted and very pedophilic in nature, a lot of the content as well. They're pushing this whole transgender agenda. They have, you know, men putting on women's makeup, and that's in the trending section, where it should be information that's valuable that people can use and, you know, that'll have a positive effect on people. They don't want that. They just want to keep everyone dumbed down, and people are starting to lose sense of reality even more when that happens, aren't they?
I was going to say, I just remembered watching the news earlier this week, and this consumer group has uncovered a number of toys designed for children, which they've tested, and in actual fact, because they're electronic, people like paedophiles could actually contact the child through the toy. So they actually went down the high street, busy high street, people buying Christmas presents for their children, said, would you buy this toy? What would you think it? And, you know, some said, oh, well, if we're not to get it, we'll get it. And I'm thinking, right, okay, what sort of, did I hear that right? The parents would buy it specifically? I don't know what this country's come to, but you reap what you sow, and I do envisage a very tough 2020.
Yeah, I think they're going to ramp up the attacks even more in the year to come. It's something we all have to brace ourselves for. And when you see the agenda is very depraved and pedophilic in nature, it goes to show who's in power, doesn't it? It's all pedophile.
Well, I think if we ever get the chance to speak publicly, I mean, I spoke in a place called Dewsbury, where it's in Yorkshire in October. And I actually finished my speech by saying the Lord's Prayer. And I tell you something, it's so powerful to do that. I have never witnessed any politician do that. Honestly, I had a captive audience of the whole of the West Yorkshire Police that were, helicopters above as well. And just make the use of any audience you can have, because, yeah, it's very powerful, the words you speak.
Absolutely. That's very impressive. And it shows your allegiances are pure in nature, unlike some that are, in control, and the ones that we should really be wary of. What sort of feedback have you received from the public over there? I'm sure it would be very positive.
They thought that speech was pretty impressive. It's just being able to get myself now sorted with a website. I'm self-funding. I basically travel around. I mean, somebody from Australia actually paid for my flight to go to Perth, and they paid for 4 nights accommodation, and I supplemented that time away and took advantage of that flight by just doing another 9 nights in Airbnb, very cheap rate. Another couple, they lent me a car for a fortnight, and then just people were generous, people I met. And so it's very difficult when you have no budget to do. I mean, I sit around the kitchen table, it's just getting the truth out there. So I do this in between the household chores.
It's very marvelous what you've been managed to achieve, and I really hope that you have continued success. Sometimes you have to operate on a shoestring budget, even if it means getting the truth and information out there to the people, doesn't it? You have to make sacrifices.
Yeah. Yes, that's for sure. But thank you for having me on your show.
I'm very grateful that you appeared. What plans do you have for the year to come? What have you got set in motion?
They're talking about, I met 2 guys who've got a foundation. We're talking about flying me back to Australia. You seem to, with your farmers. So we'll see. Don't want to give the game away for the dark side.
That could be a very wise strategy. Well, look, once again, I'm very grateful to have you on the program. Is there any closing statements that you'd like to have for the viewers?
I'd just like, if people get the time, to have a look at Caroline Stevens Seeking the Truth. And I've also got a secondary channel called Caroline Stevens Chit Chat. If you can subscribe, it just, I'm getting up to almost 2,000 subscribers now. It's hard work because people just like to watch videos on Facebook. But since I can't do Facebook anymore, I really need people to look on YouTube now. So my Lisbon Treaty video on Facebook at the beginning of this year got almost 470,000 hits.
Wow.
Yeah, so getting on towards 500,000. Now, if I'd have got £1 for every view, but that was for the public, and that was the Lisbon Treaty video going viral. It's, the authorities are never going to let such an important video like that ever go viral again, I'm sure.
Well, I applaud your bravery and commitment. It's tremendous what you've been able to achieve, and I wish you the very best in the future, and Merry Christmas as well.
Merry Christmas to you. I forgot about that. It's Christmas time. Thank you for having me on the show, and hopefully you'll have me on sometime next year.
Well, that concludes another broadcast. It's been a pleasure having your company. Remember, links will be in the description to Top Buzz and BitChute. You'll be able to find me there, and I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year if I don't see you again. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. You'll find me again on the We Are Change talk show, where we expose corruption 1 episode at a time. You better believe it.